Hi, Carol Bowser here, President of Conflict Management Strategies. I love helping organizations prevent or avoid workplace conflict. And over the years, I have developed a cadre of people that I go to and am interested by and help me become better at what I do. And I am very excited to share this person with you, Miss Daphne Schneider, who is I will let her introduce herself, but one of the things that makes Daphne unique, among many things, is that she's actually a licensed private investigator and does a lot. In fact, as of last year, over 500 workplace investigations. 600 workplace investigations. So we're going to be talking a little bit about maybe what leads people into an investigation, what happens within organizations, kind of before, during, and after, and hopefully give you all some insights and maybe some tips and tricks that you can leverage to prevent your own conflict at work. Daphne, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So as Carol said, I do workplace investigations. I didn't grow up to do that. Um, I grew up in human resources, and I didn't grow up to do that either. With my degree, undergraduate degree in history, that wasn't the natural step, but it was where I landed when I needed a job. Um, And eventually, I got very tired of human resources, had the opportunity to do management uh, in a bigger sense. So I ended up managing, if you will, the back of the house work in a large school district. I had a staff of 400 people. So I learned how to actually do the work that I had been advising people about these many years. And it is harder to do than to advise. That was a good lesson. And then people over the years had suggested that I get a master's degree in human resources, and I wanted to know why in the world I would do that because I was an HR director. But then somebody introduced me to the field of organization development, which is basically helping organizations make change. And I thought that sounded fascinating. I could use that in my work. I got a master's degree in that field and discovered that attempting to be a prophet in your own land did not work for me. People were kind of in the, oh, Daphne went to another class. Okay, Daphne, what is it this time? So I opened the business, which I've had now almost 30 years, and ended up doing workplace investigations because lawyers came to my doorstep for investigation services that I had done internally in HR. The world did not come to my doorstep, at least initially, for organization development services. So I became a licensed private investigator, and here I am. And all of the work that I do is in the workplace. I don't do any sitting outside of anybody's home at 3 in the morning, but I do know people who do that if you need that service. So that's the very short version.
So it's like, Daphne, what I'm hoping you and I can talk about is a little bit of insider baseball, or insider kind of investigations. Because sometimes you and I work together where you've done an investigation, there's been some type of finding, and we both know that nobody is ever pleased with whatever finding it is. Oftentimes they're not pleased with the process, and then they're kind of left to say, okay, now go and work together. And you kind of do the investigation, and then I come in and say, okay, how can we reformulate work so that way that people can work together without going down some really bad roads. So I'm curious, are there kind of some things that actually lead people to, ask for an investigation? And I think a sub question is like, why should they ask for an investigation versus like are there reasons why like an investigation maybe isn't a road that they should choose?
All of that, yes. Um, I have found, so as Carol said, I've conducted now somewhere over 600 investigations. For a long time, I was going to count and then I gave up, but it's about that. And they're all in workplaces of all kinds, at all levels of public, private, and nonprofit organizations. I have found that the vast majority, I'm going to say 75%, I'm not sure that's exact, the vast majority of situations that I end up investigating, nothing illegal has happened. I am not a lawyer, so I don't make a legal finding, if you will, but I know enough to know what I'm looking at. Often, nothing against the organization's policies has even happened, but a whole lot of things have gone wrong. And they've gone wrong to the point where either somebody has made a formal complaint, if the organization or the business has some kind of a formal complaint process, or they're threatening to. I'm going to go to the rights agencies or wherever. Or there's been some kind of a labor management issue where the union has made a complaint. Or management is looking at a situation and they're saying, we have so many things bubbling up here. We've got this complaint over here and this complaint over here. We need to look at this a little more holistically. We want you to look at the whole situation and these 8 complaints that we've got. In terms, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So one of the things that I've also seen is that I think many organizations have been very good about saying, if you have a concern, always try to resolve it at the lowest level. We know that nobody really wants to talk to the person that they're complaining about. So then they maybe go to the manager, and maybe they don't see action being taken, or they don't see behavioral change. Or it kind of gets lost in the shuffle because people don't close the loop to let them know that they have followed through. And I think it's a little bit like a 911 situation. Now, 911 folks are some of my clients. And so my point is that when 911 first came in, because there was a time before there was 911, there was a big marketing campaign of letting people know that 911 is an option. Well, that marketing message has been fully ingrained that if you need help, call 911. So we have 911 centers fielding things about the time of day or a neighborhood complaint. That's not it. Are you finding that people are using that employees are wanting to file a complaint to be able to get attention drawn to something? Or
that certainly is what happens. The other thing that happens, that actually that doesn't concern me so much, even though clearly that is what happens, as long as and it's usually an HR person or an HR department or something like that where they make a complaint, as long as that person or that department understands that not everything needs to be investigated.
So what type of things in your experience actually do need to be investigated?
Well, allegations of illegal behavior, which, if they were proven true, would be significant. That's a problem. That needs to be looked into by somebody. Not necessarily by an outside person, but by somebody. Situations that come to HR that even if everything that the person coming to HR, even if everything they said was absolutely true, we still wouldn't act on it, don't investigate it. So
I'm sorry, I'm giggling because one of the things that I hear is like that sometimes people want to do an investigation, but there's not like what you and I might say, well, what's the next logical step of like, well, so you're going to bring everybody in, go through this process, and then whatever the results are, we really don't have a plan on acting on it, that like just doing the investigation is the one and only full stop thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Partly, but it's also a matter of what's the complaint? What's the issue here? I don't like my supervisor. I want a different supervisor. Let's do an investigation. What are we investigating? Well, my supervisor is mean. What does mean look like? Well, they just give me too much work. Okay, there's nothing contrary to policies that I've ever seen called too much work. They're certainly not illegal to be given too much work. I don't like the work they're giving me. I'm sorry. I think they're giving me work that should go to Henry over here because Henry's lazy and he doesn't do anything. Okay.
Got it. So it sounds like one of the kind of one of the themes is like we're we're complaining about our manager or their lack of management skills, or we don't like how they're distributing work, versus a complaint that is a violation of company policy and or potential state or federal laws like harassment or discrimination or
Exactly.
retaliation.
Exactly.
But we're using the same language. Do you find that a lot of people are kind of maybe not thinking like an investigator or a
Well,
lawyer or HR does in that respect?
certainly, and there's no reason they would. I mean, if I am a research scientist and what I work on is bacteria, why in the world would I understand workplace investigations? How many people have said to me over the years, I've never been involved in this sort of thing before? Well, no, that's good. We're glad you
Yes.
haven't.
I was giggling because I can definitely see the correlation between bacteria and workplace conflict because it tends to thrive in certain environments. I was just throwing away moldy hot dog buns that looked perfectly fine in the counter, and then I pulled them up and like, oh well, there's one piece of mold, and then I'll have to tell you,
There's all
Daphne,
the
I
mold
just
you
kind of
didn't
think
see.
about it. I'm like, well, what if I just take that one away? And then I pull it out and it's just, imbued
Yeah.
with all of that different
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. In some of your recommendations, how much of your recommendations might be like, hey, maybe we need to have, coaching for this manager or clearer direction, or, maybe we've just never trained them how to manage.
98%. So what happens is there's poor communication of some sort, commonly, be it between a manager and a subordinate, be it between two coworkers, be it between people in different areas of the organization, whatever it is. There's poor or unclear communication. There are people who don't want to offend anybody, so they don't say whatever it is. And sometimes that's the manager, and sometimes it's not. There are people who, when the work environment is not what they want, they believe it is quote unquote a hostile work environment because it feels hostile to me. Well, hostile work environment is a legal term of art. It is used by people all the time because it feels really hostile, but it has very specific legal definitions.
Yeah.
So they go in, they make a complaint that I'm in a hostile work environment, and immediately HR jumps on it and says we need to investigate. Well, no, you need to go further and figure out what that actually means. So there are many, many, many situations that shouldn't be investigated.
So I know that you have kind of like a really three bullet points that I call it the lack of your lack of piece that you seem to see as kind of a common thread in in your investigations. And for those of you who are out there listening, I would love for you to take this as a framework and maybe ask a couple of questions. Is it possible that any of these three things are going on? Daphne, what are those three things?
Well, and I have to say, I lifted these from someone that I heard in a training 40 years ago. And I would give this person credit if only I could remember their name, but I can't. So there are three fatal flaws in a supervisor or a manager. One is lack of skill, and it's not the technical skill of the work that they're doing. It's the skill of managing people or supervising people.
Yeah.
And what often happens in organizations is that people get promoted because they have wonderful technical skills. And sometimes it's they get promoted because the only way we can pay you more is to make you a supervisor or a manager, and you're going to leave us if we don't pay you more. Except now you have to manage all these people. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah. By the way, there you
And
go.
that's not what you
I'm
wanted to do.
also
You wanted to be the bacteria researcher person that we talked about a moment ago.
Yeah, like that
You,
wasn't. And then I think one of the things that I've seen is that kind of lack of skill. I've seen a lot of people that they may be on an interim basis, or people are just understaffed, and so it's kind of a default.
Mhm.
And if this is you, you are not alone. It's kind of a common thread in many, many, many organizations that you're promoted. And we'll get to the training later, and there may be kind of a
Maybe.
foundational like, okay, do this, not don't do that, but no, operationally, how do I go about doing it? It's more informational than
Yeah.
operational.
Well, and often the only training, if you will, that people have had in management or supervision is watching people who managed them or supervised them
Or
and
didn't,
saying, pardon?
or didn't manage
Yeah.
them or
And,
supervise them.
and saying, I want to do that because I thought that worked really well, or I don't want to do this because, oh, it was awful. Not the best way to learn.
All right.
And then, so if lack of skill is one of the pieces, and often people may not know they have a lack of skill in that area. The
Yeah.
second one, and these are not in order exactly, is a lack of guts. I may have the skill, so I know what the tools are, but it's kind of scary. I don't want to meet with this person who can be obnoxious and tell them I really need them to work differently or to do this task that they've announced they don't want to do or to behave differently with their colleagues, whatever it is. And that's not a skill question, it's a guts question, it's a willingness question.
Yeah. Okay. So lack of skill, lack of will. What would be the
The
really
third
bad
one,
trinity? Yeah.
the third one, which I would never have thought of except this person did, is an insatiable desire to be liked. If I behave in this way, these people that I used to have as coworkers before I got promoted to a management position,
Yeah.
they won't like me anymore. And people need to kind of think and this is more your department than mine, but think inside themselves, is that my motivation for not wanting to talk to Henrietta, one of my straw people, who is difficult to deal with? And that's a piece of it, that may be lack of guts, but also, Henrietta and I have been friends for 15 years, and I don't want to mess with that. So it's an
Yeah.
insatiable desire to be liked.
I'll even say that that one of the complaints that I hear that when I talk to people, it's like, hey, they're conflict adverse, or they really want to be liked,
Mhm.
and it's a little bit of a Michael Scott in The Office thing. That one of the key things that character was he desperately wanted to be liked and was confusing being liked with being respected.
Mhm.
And it's not saying that they may be upset with the decision, but are they upset with you? And I think that's a real difficult situation, in that most people don't distinguish the person from the decision. It's that if I dislike the decision, therefore I dislike the person. And if they really liked me, they would do this, or if they really understood the position, they would do this. And I have found in my work that a lot of times middle managers are pulled in a lot of different directions, that if they do things to build trust and relationships with the people they supervise, then they're viewed as not being enough of a manager and not aligned with management. And then if they align with management, then they're disliked. So I just want to acknowledge, if you're a middle manager, it is really hard. And I'll even include like vice presidents and things like
Yep.
that, because working with people higher up, they have less power than people think they do.
And they have less knowledge of what's going on than people think they do. Often I find parts of complaints that amount to, well, management should have known, fill in the space there. They should have known Henry was a bully. And how would they have known that? Well, everybody knows how Henry doesn't behave that way when the manager's sitting in the room. Well, yeah, but everybody knows that that's Henry. Not necessarily.
Yeah. So a lot of assumptions there. So one of the things that I see in my work post investigation is everybody feels hit, and this is kind of pulling from like a mutual conflict geek, Gary Harper, who wrote The Joy of Conflict Resolution, and one of his great things was, in conflict, everybody feels hit. So we're dealing with that. I'm feeling hit. I'm feeling betrayed. All of those different things. Do you find kind of like feeling like a lack of trust, and like kind of feeling taken advantage of? Is that a common theme when you interview people for investigations?
I don't know how common it is. I certainly see it, And the longer an issue has been going on, the more common it is. And sometimes I will deal with issues where, especially if people have been in an organization a while, well, yeah, I mean, when in 1998, when Henry came to, well, Beasts Are Us Incorporated, he's been like that since 1998, and there's been an issue between him and Sally since 2000. Oh, nobody's dealt with it, and it's just been there. It's just kind of who they are and how they are, and at some point, what often happens is that at some point, the company or the organization hires somebody who says, "I'm not putting up with that. It's nice that you've been having these issues for 30 years, but I'm not putting up with that."
Yeah, and that's often, I hear that too. It's like, well, that's just who they are, which is saying that people aren't going to change their behaviors, which I think, well, maybe. However, as an employer, you could say this is the zone of behaviors and this is the degree of the behaviors that's acceptable within a workplace. That's in alignment with our policy. So it could be that Henrietta likes to have a lot of information and starts really bugging people, and that maybe Henrietta shows her opinions on different things. Okay, good for Henrietta. Or it's that Bob, I love Bob, that, he may be very direct and very, and to the point that it feels brusque, and it's like that, well, that's just Bob. However, this is kind of where the soft skills coming in. Like, okay, how can we give people feedback? How can we kind of recognize that, like, okay, what you're doing isn't really coming across really well. How can you adapt?
Now, the two things that makes me think of is, one, it may have been okay behavior X number of years ago or X number of bosses ago, and now we have people in place who are saying this is not acceptable behavior.
True. And
It was
so over my time, I found that there are some words that I start not liking. Um, my my newest word, not so new, is authentic. Now, some people might say, Carol, we want to be able to bring our authentic selves to work. I find it's a bit of a shorthand, and it's a little bit has become overused, like psychological safety. You and I and other colleagues have sat around having coffee together and saying, when people say, employers say they really want people to bring their authentic selves to work, we all look at each other and say, no, they don't. They really don't want people to bring their authentic selves to
no.
work. What they may want is people to be able to have conversations saying, this is what I'm hoping for the relationship. This is what I can bring. This is what I can bring to the team, that type of stuff, and not kind of masking things. However, what if, one of the favorite movies of all time, 9 to 5, what if you're, a sexist, egotistical, racist bigot? We don't want all of that.
Right.
So when people now use the word authentic, what does that signal for you?
It signals a question, which I actually ask not only about that word, but about many others that are general in nature. What does that look like? So when I'm seeing this, if I'm sitting next to Henry who is not being authentic, what am I seeing Henry do that is inauthentic? And I have that conversation with people frequently because people tend to label.
Yeah.
Susie's a bully. What does Susie do that's bullying? I'm in the middle of an investigation right now where someone is being accused of bullying for sending too many emails. Really? Okay. How many emails is too many? Well, sometimes 30 a day, and I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to respond. That's clearly an issue. Is that bullying? I don't know. But that's getting to the description of what makes me feel bullied. Oh, in this case, it's too many emails.
And I think, Daphne, you're bringing up a really good soft skill of, rather than reacting to it and saying, no, I'm not, no, you're not, it's saying, okay, what does that look like? Is it the degree? Is it the tone? That we start by asking questions, because people will use words like authentic or teaming or not professional. and being
Yes.
able to stop and say, that's a real shorthand for something that has a lot of things going underneath it. So one of the soft skills, instead of reacting, to say that. Um, I'm also seeing, as we're learning more about neurodiversity in the workplace and how different brains function differently, when people will say, hey, I'm telling people exactly what I think, and I'm being direct, but now I'm being accused of being a bully, but I'm telling them what I think. So even this idea of authenticity, where people are being too direct, or they're expressing what feels like an emotion or feels like judgment, for those who are kind of reading in between the lines and trying to figure out what's happening. So
You just
my
disappeared
advice,
on
and I
me.
don't know if you have the same advice, of like, can we just put the authentic word aside, and start being able to say, I'd like to have, and I would even say, can we put the word honest aside? Because that's
Oh,
assuming that you determine what is honest and what isn't honest. And I always say, well, they may not feel safe discussing this, or they're emphasizing certain things. So it's like, honesty and authenticity is actually sitting in judgment on somebody else. If you can't say, I'm feeling inconsistent information here,
well,
that's a different label.
another word that goes with those is I'm not feeling respected. But respect looks really different to different people. To
Yeah.
some, just a simple example, to some people it means if I have a meeting with you at 1 o'clock, you need to be here at 10 to 1. That's respect. But hey, on Daphne Standard Time, it's you better be here by 10 after 1. So even something as simple as that. Uh, Talk about the actual behavior, not the label for that behavior. And a lot of those behaviors they're not illegal, they're not unethical, they're not even mostly against company policy. They're just assumptions that I have about how you ought to act.
Yeah. So, Daphne, because you've done so many investigations, I also find that people don't really know what to expect in an investigation process. Now, I know that different investigators do things differently.
Yeah.
Um, and if you get a call to meet with someone like an investigator, it can be hugely unsettling. Like, you don't know if you've done something wrong. And also, because the vast majority of people have never done it, it's hugely ambiguous, and we don't know what to do, how to do it. So can you just kind of lay out some things that people might generally expect if they're asked to participate in an investigation?
I think the first thing that I would want to know if I'm in the workplace and there's an investigation and I get notified that I'm going to be interviewed is I want to ask whether I'm a witness or whether there's some kind of complaint about me. I want to know that at the front end.
Will
As
most investigators tell you if you're a witness or if the complaint's been made against you?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And before the investigator even has a conversation, the boss or the HR department or the whoever it is that's setting this up needs to tell the person, there's been a complaint about you. I don't have to necessarily tell you what the details are, but I will tell you that there's a complaint or an issue. Depending on the organization's practices, and if you have a union, depending on the bargaining unit and the rules around that collective bargaining agreement, they may or may not have to tell you if you're the respondent, if you're the person against whom a complaint has been made. They may or may not have to tell you at the front end what the complaint is. Depends. When I'm talking to witnesses, I will not necessarily give them a whole lot of information. I will have questions for them. But I want to be very, very neutral in the way that I'm asking things. So I want to, whether it's a witness and if it's a complainant, if the person I'm talking to is the person who brought the complaint, I usually show up with yellow paper with nothing on it. So tell me what's going on here. Often, especially if I don't have anything in writing from them. So I just take a lot of notes. I remain neutral. And my notes are a reflection of what's been said. They're not my opinions about anything. They're just a reflection of what's been said. So there will be interviews. There might be written requests for written information from the person. If there are emails, if there are documents, if there are whatever, those might be requested. And then at some point, there's usually a written report that's given back to my client, the business, the organization, the whatever it is. I always tell people that they need to assume that what they tell me will be potentially in that report. So it could be ultimately in some public venue. It's unlikely, if it's a private organization or a private nonprofit, the only way it could get to that venue would be through a court proceeding, and these things usually don't go there. But if it's a public entity, it's just a request for public records, and it's out there.
So a couple of things that I've seen kind of coming in post investigation, because I'm very clear. I don't give legal advice anymore, and I don't do investigations. Like whatever my work is with that work group, I don't change personas. I have people that I refer investigations out to, and also I've read a fair amount of investigative reports. And sometimes those investigative reports are done by attorneys, and sometimes they're viewed as attorney-client privilege, so nobody gets access to those. And I also find that sometimes people say, like, well, there was this investigation. Shouldn't I receive a copy of the report? Shouldn't I know what the findings are? In your experience, how often do people actually get a copy of the actual report, the summary of the report, or actually told what the findings are?
Depends on who the people are. So if it's the complainant, the person who brought the issue, they will most often be told, yes, we found that what you said had evidence behind it, and I'll talk about that in a moment, or no, it didn't. If they are the respondent, the person against whom a complaint was made, they will almost always be told, yes, that was founded, and as a result, we're going to suspend you for 5 days and send you to training, or whatever it is we're going to do as a consequence.
Great. Hey, Daphne, let me ask you a question, because I find that sometimes the complainant deeply, deeply, deeply wants to know what consequences go against the people or people who they named in complaint. How often does that actually happen? And is the complainant actually entitled to that?
That virtually never happens. And the best explanation I can give for that is that basically personnel issues are confidential. If it was about you, if you were the respondent, you wouldn't want anybody to know whatever it is. And in the same way, management is not going to share that with you if you're the complainant. Again, if it's in the public world, it's a whole different story, and that's potentially available. But it's at the front end, it's almost never shared. Now, that said, people often share it themselves. You'll never guess what they did to me.
And I've also seen it where maybe they don't share it, and the behavior that was complained about doesn't really substantively change to the degree that the person filing the complaint wanted it. So they're like, see, nothing happened.
Yep.
HR, they're not doing anything. And
Yep.
So I also see this where I'm not sure that a lot of organizations explain to the people of, when you make the complaint, that's great, and it happened to you. However, the organization owns the complaint, and what they want to do with it, that is theirs.
Yes.
And if you have questions about, like, well, what kind of punishment or accountability is going on, the organization will not, as you said, shouldn't be sharing that information. So let's be honest, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the people will kind of like nod and wink of like, well, I wouldn't be telling you this, but generally this is kind of what happens. The other thing is the person that the complaint was made against may also be telling things that, I don't use the word false or lying, I say it may not be fully accurate, but the employer can't go back and say, no, 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 we didn't tell Carol that. What we told Carol is that was bad, and
Right.
we're compelling you to go to training, and we're giving you a coach, and you can't do that anymore, and we're putting you on a PIP for it. But they're just that I might be saying, look at how terrible they treated me, and yeah, I get to keep my job, everything's good, and I may not be sharing anything at all. To your point, that I might be embarrassed, but it's like not everybody has access to all of the information, and quite frankly, I don't think we have to kind of take a little bit of a grain of salt with what anybody said. I do think that maybe employees could ask the question, what should I expect in this investigation? To the investigator and the HR,
Mhm.
like, what can I expect about my level of confidentiality?
Yep.
Am I going to get notified of what the results are? What happens if I don't see the behaviors
Yep.
improving?
Yep.
Who am I
Yep.
supposed to go to?
Excellent
And
questions.
how do I know that you're taking me seriously and taking action? Because Daphne, once a complaint is filed, I don't know if you see the same way, that is an indication that there has been a breach of trust and confidence in the employer to take care of what they think is that needs to be taken care of. And then
Yes.
when the employer says, well, just trust us that it's taken care of, they're like, I think it goes a little bit against human nature. Like, well, I told you and you didn't take care of it. So how am I
Yeah.
magically supposed to know that no evidence is evidence that you're doing something?
Yeah. Well, and absolutely to all of that. The couple of other things I would say is that in the work that I do, I look for evidence. Evidence doesn't mean 12 storks flew over Seattle, 12 babies were born, the storks brought the babies. Not how it works. Though people do that all the time. Well, I saw Susie walk into Henry's office and close the door. I know they're talking about me. No, actually, you don't. Well, Henry and I just had a fight, and then he walked into Susie's office. I know that's what they're talking about. No, you don't know that. You know, Henry walked into Susie's office. So a lot of that sort of thing happens. I look for what's called a preponderance of evidence. That means more than 50% of the evidence says something or doesn't say something. So it's a low, in a sense, it's a low bar. It's not like in a criminal court, which is, way, way, way higher. But there has to be evidence that actually says that. And I judge whether the evidence is credible or not. And I do that in a number of different ways. But it's based on that. So might behavior be going on and I can't find the evidence? Yep. That could happen. Might there not be a change in the behavior of the person who allegedly did whatever the bad thing was? Yep, and that's in management's lap to deal with that. But again, they might not know. Somebody needs to tell them whether that behavior is changing or not.
So it's so funny that you use the word lap, because I know that you investigate sex harassment, things like that. Like, no laps. We don't touch laps. We don't sit in laps. We don't do anything about laps. No lap dances. No whatever. It's just
I will a total aside. A total aside. One of the most interesting, unusual settings in which I ever conducted an investigation was in a gymnastics and trapeze organization. They teach gymnastics and trapeze, and they also teach pole dancing. And sexual harassment complaint in the pole dancing class. That was very interesting to disentangle. So you have to take it in whatever the context is.
correct. I've actually worked with some organizations where they do plastic surgeries.
Hmm.
And so you literally are talking about boobs and butts, and there
Hmm.
are pictures of boobs and butts every place.
Yep.
And so different workplaces deal with different things. That if you're talking about body parts and things like that, there's that aspect of it, but then it's where it's becoming overly sexualized is one thing. So we can't say like, okay, well, if part of your work is that I actually physically need to put my hands on people to spot them, the general guideline of don't touch people isn't
Goes
going
away.
to work. It's
Right.
more like, do we have protocols where we recognize that there are ways to touch that fall within the realm of doing the work that's not
Yes.
lingering too long or not doing some other creepy things? Because you and I have both heard and talked to people about creepy things that happen in the workplace.
On a
And it's
regular
like,
basis.
let's not and honestly, for those folks who are out there, if you could ever be a fly on the wall when we have conversations about people, nothing is identified as far as clients go, but it's like, wow, okay, yeah. So, Daphne, that leads me to, what kind of preemptive measures that by the time, they are talking to you about an investigation, clearly it's like down one road. What are some preemptive measures from you after years of experience, over 600 investigations? Advice can you give to maybe managers, but also maybe advice you can give to workers so that way maybe we don't end up in an investigation, or yeah, there we go. What's some preemptive advice?
Well, a couple of things from the management end. I think management needs to be clear on what the expectations are. Those include organizational values, includes organizational expectations for communication. It includes training managers and supervisors in what that looks like in their workplace. Is it okay to yell at people? Well, we have really loud machinery here, and I have to yell at people. That's again, one of the context things. So all of those kinds of things need to be clear from the top down. A lot of this lands on management first. Consistency, have the same expectations for people. Again, communicate clearly, listen when employees are complaining. The number of times, I can't even count, where people have said, I've brought this to my supervisor, I brought this to management, I brought this to my old supervisor. Nobody listened. What does listening look like? Well, listening looks like doing something. So you have to go back and you have to close that circle. I listened, I addressed it with whoever, if that was appropriate, and I came back to you and said, here's what I did.
I want to highlight something that you said that I think is so critical that if people could take away. For most people, listening means doing something. It's not just, hey, I gave them an opportunity to vent.
Right.
It's listening me to show that you are listening, because listening is what your mind does interiorly. People are looking for some type of observable action or some type of change to take place to show that you listened. Um, the other thing I also find is that if some people view it as a one and done, that if like organizations that are very fast paced, they're behind the ball on everything, they're like, we're just fixing the problem and moving it on, fix, move on, fix, move on, fix, move on. They may not see that it's a pattern. And if people say, I think this is a pattern, or this is an example of a theme of not being treated with respect, or a theme of lack of communication, or a theme of lack of politics. And if your word is like, Carol, that theme sounds way too arty farty, management style, you could say, hey, I'm seeing a pattern. This looks like it falls into the pattern. This looks like it falls into the bucket. Because if you have one and done people, they are going to assume we fixed it and we moved on. And to your point of when people say that they're giving you information, even if they don't say it, there is an expectation you're going to do something about it. Except, of course, if they say, don't tell anybody, I
Which,
don't really want you to talk to anybody about this. But the thing is, you are still accountable
yes.
for that. And if they come up, you're saying, maybe manager could say, hey, is this related to that conversation that you talked about before? So as managers, you are supposed to have a large organizational knowledge. And so people are coming up to you with complaints, with questions, with concerns, like at least pausing and not reacting to them, but asking the question of like, is this in any way related to what we talked about before? Um,
Yeah,
I think that's a way to,
a couple
have a
of
better
things on
conversation.
that. To some extent, managers or supervisors should never agree not to tell. Employees may want them to do that. If you're a supervisor or manager and an employee comes in and says, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell, the answer is, then you can't tell me, because I cannot promise that. It depends on what you tell me. If you tell me something about your medical condition, I can promise not to tell. If you tell me if you tell me Henry's pinching Susie on the butt in the hallway, all bets are off.
And to your point too of like they say don't tell, in my experience I found it's because like if I'm complaining about you or bringing forward concerns about you, I'm bringing it forward to our mutual supervisor because I don't think me talking to you about it is going to have you change anything.
Or I'm too
And
scared to talk to you.
or I'm too scared, or like quite frankly, Daphne, you're a pain in my ass, and if you feel as though I'm annoying, you may say something about me, you may complain about me, and then you're turning it around on me, and people will say Daphne's not taking accountability, and I just go, how much time and effort is it that Daphne is going to make more time and effort for me to do this? So this shows that you and I aren't in alignment and having a conversation. And you know that people will say, we don't need for you to like each other. We need for you to work together. So one of the things that we get is this triangulation that managers and supervisors are like, I'm sick of the triangulation. You need to talk to each other. But this also goes to when people are bringing forward things to you, a coworker, are you reacting to it and saying, no, that didn't happen. No, you're wrong. That's not true. Or actually, are you trying to figure out like, what do you mean by that?
Well, and again, it's back to asking for what's the specific behavior that happened here, and not stopping at Susie's mean or Henry bullies or whatever those big words are, but really saying, okay, well, they yelled. Tell me more about yelling. Was their voice raised? Well, not exactly, but it didn't feel good. Oh, not, maybe they did whatever it was, and we have a tendency. Yelling is one of my popular words, like your authenticity is my yelling. It's people feel yelled at when it's something was said that made them uneasy for whatever.
And I want to highlight that too, because that's huge. It's like, because when we have evidence of something, it's like, was there a raised voice? And I have heard people say, Carol, it was an open office plan. And Daphne is saying I yelled at her. If I had yelled at her, Georgia, John, and Tiffany would have heard that. You talk to them and they, and Georgia, Jim, and Tiffany may say, I'm staying the hell out of this. I'm not going to say that I heard anything at all.
Right.
But it's like what you're describing is I had a reaction to this. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel, threatened. It made me feel attacked. It made me feel belittled. And so it's like, okay, maybe we can do something with that. But when we get to an investigation, was there yelling? Right. Yelling means that there was a raised tone of voice that could be heard, and yelling at people is against our policy.
Which takes us back to you need a policy.
You need a policy.
That's one of the pieces. You need expectations, you need a policy. And my personal expectations for how people should behave if I'm working with them may not be your personal expectations, which is why the organization needs to be clear on what the expectations are in this workplace.
Yeah, and I'll also say that it may not be one exact expectation, but I say that there's a range of behaviors that fit within that, and we need to figure out, is this within the range, is this outside the range, or is it butting up next to the range?
Well, and we need to be able to have conversations about that.
Yeah, and to your point of it's not just the skills go back to you have to have if there is a lack of skill, we need to provide training and language and frameworks to increase the skill building. If it's a lack of will, generally it's a lack of skill and also a little bit of fear, but then also the need to be liked. So certainly the employers can provide the training, they can encourage, debrief, ask curiosity questions, give feedback, so that way we're training how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, and what to do with it, even if we think the feedback is a bunch of BS, going forward for that. And then also being able to say, like, if I want to take a manager and supervisory role, but it's super, super important that I'm liked about this and I'm really uncomfortable giving feedback, maybe it's an opportunity to ask for the skill building set, or maybe just saying, what, I don't think this is going to be a good fit for me.
Right. Yeah. A couple of other things, if I might comment on them. I think it's really important to look at the culture of the organization, which lands more, in a sense, in your department than in mine. But it's something I see, particularly where you have a culture of blame. I didn't do it; they did it. Anybody else. So there's a lack of expectation that people take accountability for whatever it is, which makes it really hard for anybody to say, "Yeah, I messed that up," because you're all going to throw stones at me.
Yeah. I also say that I'm thinking more accountability is one of those words too, because everybody says there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of ownership. And I find that most people make decisions that seem reasonable to them in the moment,
Yes.
based on the information they have and based on the position that they have.
Right.
So saying, being able to say, like, hey, I'm going to own this part of it. I made this decision based on this information, and I took this action or decided not to take that action. And I will also say that organizations are very intermingled things. And so it's kind of where it's one person acting completely alone, that there probably are factors in there. And if you say they lack accountability, it's like, well, what exactly does that look like? Are you looking for them to take blame?
Here we are again.
And if they try to explain why they made the decision, you're like, there's just storytelling. They're just so, what exactly does that look like to you in practice?
By the way, I'll throw another word out to you that has become one of my, I don't know, sort of like your authenticity, is transparency.
Yeah, no.
No?
So I would say yes, and I've often said that organizations aren't completely transparent. They're at best translucent, and different people
Oh, I like that.
have different ideas of what full transparency is. I think I stole that from somebody else at one point in time. It's like, no, they're at best translucent. However, it should be transparent enough that people know what their decision-making authority is,
Yeah.
how to be successful in their job, and what they're expected to communicate out on. But some organizations, through no fault of anybody's, may be so opaque that nobody really knows what's going on, how to succeed, or what's going on. So it's kind of really hard to take accountability when we feel as though we're off in the metaphorical wilderness and we can't see outside of all of the organizational fog.
In which case, I will blame you when I feel bad, and I will make a complaint about you.
Yeah. So there are different levers. Complaints, I think, are a way to draw attention and hopefully compel action. And with that, Daphne, thank you so much for sharing your insight. And so if you have in need of an investigator, Daphne Schneider and Associates, there we go. And also, not every investigator is the perfect fit for every organization.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that not everybody loves some of your findings, Daphne, and that's okay too.
That's absolutely, all of that is absolutely true, Carol. How did you know?
Because I know. So, great. Daphne, thank you so very much. And everyone, I hope you got a nugget out of that for managers, maybe something you can put to use or have some conversations about. If you want to be a manager, maybe this is information that you should consider before saying yes to those promotions. And if maybe you are one of the influencers within a team, maybe this is something that you can then be the leader of the team to get people to talk about things that are important and kind of demystify what their expectations are of each other. And with that, thanks so much.
Thank you, Carol. Lovely conversation.